Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast, coming to you today from a lovely house in Brisbane, Australia. Today's guest has been on the show before and is an absolute wonderful mine of information about electric vehicles, renewable energy, and particularly in Australia, but very much with a very global view as well. Giles Parkinson is a proper journalist, not like me, like a proper one. So he's worked on proper newspapers as a trainee, and then he became an editor, and then he's done also. He explains a bit of it, but he has a really good grasp on it, and we have a fascinating conversation about the state of the world, the state of electric vehicles, Tesla's sales decreases around the world, which is slightly worrying. We go into that in some detail. Giles is one of the contributors. He's the founder and one of the contributors to three amazing websites: The Driven, which we refer to very often, RenewEconomy, which we also refer to very often, and One Step Off the Grid, which is essentially aimed at people who are trying to be fully off the grid and produce all their own energy. So a lot of crossovers with the Fully Charged Show. They're obviously going to be at Everything Electric Live in Sydney on the 7th, 8th and 9th of March this year, which is really good. Giles is always an amazing speaker at those events, and they just know everything. They know everything about Australia and what's going on here. And it is really impressive. I have just driven back in a Xpeng G6. It's really nice. It's got such good air conditioning, I had to turn it down. I got cold sitting in the car, and it's not a chilly day, let me tell you that. Anyway, I won't waffle on anymore. Please welcome to the Fully Charged Show podcast, Giles Parkinson. Love the Everything Electric Show? Then join us live in Sydney in March, or London in April, or in Vancouver, Farnborough and Melbourne in September, October and November 2025. So, Giles, thank you so much for joining us today. It's kind of annoying because I would love to have done it in person with you because you're only just down the road, but I think we should explain to people who've never been to Australia, just down the road here means sort of 3 or 4 hour drive, but at least we're in the same time zone.
Well, that's right. Yes, it's kind of like London to Glasgow, but warmer. But yes, no. It's great to be back on. And look, we've got video now, so that's a bit it's a bit unsettling. I should have worn a clean pair of clothes, but anyway.
It's all good. It's all good. But there's so many. I mean, actually, can you just briefly, because you have been on the show numerous times, and you're going to be at the live event that's coming up in Sydney. But can you just give people a bit of your background? Because I think I like the fact that you're a proper journalist, as opposed to someone like me who sort of stumbled into what I'm doing rather haphazardly.
Yeah, look, I actually went through a cadetship about 4 decades ago. It's over 4 decades, a proper cadetship. Old Jim Dunbar, he's a inscrutable Scottish man who used to sort of take us through all the sort of the do's and don'ts in journalism. And there was a group of about 18 of us, and it was really what seems now sort of old school. So I've been a journalist all my working life. I guess I peaked at deputy editor of the Australian Financial Review and sort of led their online strategy. And here I am, quite untech savvy, but heading a sort of an online conglomerate, if you like to call it that. But we've got 3 websites. We've got RenewEconomy, which focuses on the transition to renewables. And
sort of the economic aspects of that as well, which is really interesting.
It is interesting. Yeah. Look, the policy, the economic, the regulatory, and the technology part of it, and of course we've got the Driven, which just focuses on EVs and the EV transition and electrification now, and One Step Off the Grid, which is kind of more consumer. So we've got sort of 3 different websites there and a bunch of podcasts, and more than 500,000 unique visitors a month on the 2 major websites. So we're attracting a bit of attention, and it's actually a lot of fun doing it. And it's a really important thing to do because, for reasons best known to them, the mainstream media are just not covering it properly. So we're glad to fill in the gaps.
Yes, absolutely right. And also, I mean, I think the thing that when I go down a bit, because the world's the news is so depressing, I'll then see something often on one of your websites or elsewhere, just a piece of news about a next step, a bigger step, a breakthrough in technology or in scale of renewable energy installations. And I go, oh God, so it hasn't stopped. It's still going. There's basically it's a very exciting area. There is so much happening all the time. It's really hard to keep up.
Well, it's actually true. And look, that's one of the most common bits of feedback that we get from readers. That we really like your website because it is so positive. We actually see things that are happening. Because if you get caught in mainstream media and you only got that, and then if you went into social media, you get like a lack of information in mainstream media and then just misinformation and disinformation on social media. And we're just sort of pointing out, we're not making stuff up. We're just pointing out that, hey, South Australia is a state which is at more than 70% wind and solar, and there are no blackouts. It's going fine. The rest of Australia is going really well. Households will very soon be providing half of the energy requirements of the main grid. So we're seeing this amazing consumer growth in energy assets, which really should be laying the groundwork for a shift to sort of power to the people, apart from all the regulatory market and still policy hurdles. But we're just sort of seeing it's inevitable, but there's just a few hurdles to jump. And we feel that we're playing a really critical role in educating not just the people, we're actually educating a lot of the politicians and the policymakers. So when people come into the industry, into the market, they go, well, where do I find out about this stuff? And people say, well, go to RenewEconomy, go to the Driven, because that's where you can find out about what's happening in the industry, in the market, and that's what people do.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right, and that is I've realised in the last few years a really critically important part, because we've had this change of government in the UK late last year. And, which was after 14 years of, stuff. We don't need to talk about it. Some good. It's not all bad. Nothing's ever all bad. Some positive. Very generally positive attitude towards renewables and particularly offshore wind and electric vehicles. But, let's move on to that. But what is interesting is when you'll hear a politician, particularly recently, a particular case said, we're going to go more for renewables and more for electric vehicles and more for carbon capture and storage. And my little alarm bell goes ding, 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 ding. Carbon. So they have been sold. Someone is lobbying, as Pete has talked to them, and they've been at meetings where they've talked about the advantages of carbon capture and storage. And I've looked at it in great detail. I know a couple of really clever atmospheric scientists and engineers and physicists, and I've never met anyone who works in the field which could enable something like carbon capture and storage to work, to say, oh yeah, we can make it work. Like, it's basically a boondoggle that means we can carry on burning fossil fuel. It's simple as that.
Absolutely.
And so you're absolutely right. The politicians need as much education as any of us. I mean, they're the ones making the decisions. Well, they used to be.
So.
Yeah, they used to be.
We hope so.
They used to be, although we've got rather an exception happening at the moment in the United States. I mean, I do want to mention this just because it's kind of all over the news as we speak. Everywhere I've read is reductions in sales of Tesla cars, and it's not to do with people not wanting electric cars, it's to do with the boss. And that's I find it really upsetting and a difficult topic because of the incredible achievements that company has made and that man has done in the past with SpaceX and with Tesla and everything, like that. It is a really difficult one, but it's clearly having an impact. I mean, I don't know, is it having an impact on sales in Australia? I know it is, particularly in France. Really dramatic impact. Basically, no one's going to buy a Tesla in France now. Such a shame.
It was actually interesting to see that Tesla's fallen in all those European markets, including in Norway, where I think Model Y was the best-selling vehicle. Now it's fallen to number 6, and the top-selling vehicle EV in Norway is a Toyota, and followed by some VWs. And you're just going, hang on, what's going on there? But look, in Australia, Tesla sales have absolutely plunged. Last year, they were down 17% overall when the overall EV market grew. In January this year, they're down another 33%. So they're actually just 1/4 of their level in January 2 years ago. Now, it should be said that the Australian EV market in January was not healthy, so a lot of companies fell. But I don't think there is any doubt that Tesla is on the nose with a lot of consumers, and because Tesla has always accounted for more than half and up to 2/3 of the Australian EV market, because I was looking at the top 10 models in Norway, and 8 out of those 10 you can't get in Australia. So so we're still way behind in a lot of those models. So what Tesla does has an impact on the rest of the market. We've got one contributor who works for us. He used to work at Polestar, and he said that even 4 years ago, he was in the Polestar showrooms in Australia, and people would walk in saying, I really like Tesla, but I'm not going to buy one of those cars because of Elon Musk. And that was 3 or 4 years ago. So, I mean, he's always been a divisive figure. People haven't liked him for whatever reason. But I think that's intensified now that he's come out in such... Well, it's just really quite striking what he's doing. I just think his political views, his misogyny, his hand gestures, his interference, his conspiracy theories, his disinformation, misinformation, it's really quite disturbing. I got my doctor into a Tesla a year ago, and he's now complaining that he's been harassed in his home village around where he is. We know people who are not buying Teslas because of Musk, and we know people who own Teslas who are thinking about, I don't want to be driving these anymore. And that, as you say, is a shocking thing, because I actually still think they're the best EVs, best
they're
value
amazing
EVs.
cars, yeah.
Tesla has made its battery products. I mean, they've basically changed the whole industry in Australia. They've underpinned the renewable energy transition because of the popularity of battery storage. They're not the only player, but they're probably the biggest and one of those most popular ones. So, look, I was going back and looking at my articles from 2015. I was at the Paris Climate Conference, and Elon Musk talked at the Sorbonne, and I was sitting there in the front row and going, "God, this guy's really interesting." And this is even before he's produced his first Model 3. It's before we've seen the Power Pack or the
Model Y, I suppose.
Wall.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and people were just fascinated. He had a great vision for the world. He wanted to basically save the planet, to sort of get rid of fossil fuels and change the world. But now he does seem to want to change the world, but not in a way that a lot of people feel very happy about. And, I was sort of thinking of writing a story the other day, thinking, a decade ago we thought you wanted to save the planet, and now we'd very much like you to leave it.
Yes,
because he does want to go to Mars. But,
can you concentrate on your rocket and get on it, please? And yes,
something like that. Look, and it's such an awful thing to say, and it's an awful situation to be in, because he's created these companies which have done quite amazing things, but. But look, someone said to me the other day, okay, so what are you going to do that, and you're going to go buy a car made in China? How's their government?
Well, yes, exactly. But I mean, it's a kind of known and an unknown, isn't it? I mean, if I think of what are the political opinions of the boss of Mercedes-Benz? I have no idea, and I'm not the slightest bit interested. Or the political opinions of the boss of Toyota. Anyway, I don't care. That's not the point. I'm not bothered by that. I cannot. And I have genuinely tried to ignore the opinions of the boss of Tesla. I've tried to avoid them. I've closed down my news feeds. I've stopped looking at those things, and it still leaks in. I guess because it is so extreme and therefore newsworthy, which is what that whole, that we have similar figures in the UK, who will get on the TV all the time. You think, well, they haven't done anything. No one voted for them. But they'll say something incredibly offensive and outrageous, the sort of media go, "Oh, we must show people this." And you go, "Well, yeah, okay, but maybe show a bit of balance the other side as well," which is the argument that's going on in the UK. I think that, I mean, I don't think there's anything you and I can say other than I feel it's a great pity. Because the cars, I'm in Brisbane at the moment. It is full of Teslas. It's just they're everywhere. It's so common. I would say the second most. I'm really surprised to see the second most common is MG. MG4 there's just dozens of them, and then BYD. So we're borrowing my sister-in-law's BYD Atto 3 at the moment. I've got to say it's an amazing car. I am really surprised. But I like the car, and the software works, and the sat nav takes you to where you want to go, and it's really good. The interior is quirky, but it doesn't offend me. But it's the range. We just can't believe. We keep forgetting to charge it because it just goes for days, and we go, I suppose we should charge the car. Oh God, it's just incredible. Well, I'm really impressed with it.
Yeah, well, look, it's interesting. And look, the MG4 actually grabbed top spot for 1 month last year in Australian EV sales. Yes,
wow.
And that was on the back of some fairly aggressive price cuts. So it went below 30,000 for a bit, and that's great. And that's what we are seeing a bit more in Australia now. We're seeing more competition. So we're seeing the MGs, we're seeing the BYDs, as you mentioned. We've got the Geelys and the LDVs and the Xpengs, and they're all coming in. One of the things that Tesla did extremely well, and which would make it hard for me to shift, is the network. I mean, their supercharging network is just fantastic, and that was really a really smart idea. The rest of the charging network in Australia is improving, and it's getting better, and it's getting bigger, and it's getting more reliable. But it's still, it's still just a. It's still a thought in the back of your mind.
Yes, absolutely right. I mean, we had a classic example we've just been filming in New Zealand, and I tried to use, with an Australian SIM and a British phone, we couldn't even download the app that we needed. So it just wasn't there. We'd look at we'd scan the barcode and nothing happened. We just couldn't do it. And we eventually saved by two very friendly New Zealanders who had the app, and they charged our car for us, I bought them a coffee, but it felt like it was in our favour, certainly that deal. But then we went to a Tesla supercharger that's open to any car in Auckland, works straight away, absolutely no problem, charge the car really fast. You just go, why? Why is that happening? But I think Australia is 10 steps ahead of that. I've used chargers here far more easily now, and I've even got a card that I go beep and it charges the damn car. It's annoying to have the card, but it works. So that is the important thing. I mean, isn't it crazy? And I'm sure you've thought this as well. But that was a classic example where a gas station, a filling station, there's two chargers built by installed by BP. It's a BP charge station. When you buy fuel, you put it in your car, liquid fuel, you put it in your car, you go inside, you pay for it. That thing, you've got to go through a hideous rigmarole of nightmare data acquisition. Let me buy the electricity, you absolute pillocks. Do you actively want me not to be able to do it? Is that why you've put in these chargers? Why can't I go in and pay the man in the garage? I'll give him, look, here's $10, give me $10 worth of electricity. It's a switch. Oh, God, I was frothing at the mouth, and it was really, really hot. Everyone warned us, New Zealand's really cold, take lots of thick clothes. We were steaming. We hadn't got anything cool to wear. It was horrendously hot there.
Oh, dear, that's climate change for you, Robert. Yeah,
yes.
Look, I got caught at a charging station a couple of months ago, and I was trying to use it, and I couldn't work out which app I had to use. And this little football team got off and go, "Oh, electric vehicle charging, yeah, show us how that's done." I said, It's pretty easy, actually. And sort of 5 minutes later, I'm still sort of going, They went off, had enough,
It's I don't blame anyone who's never had, particularly here, because it has, thank God, it's really moved on in the UK. So they're now all new chargers are tap to pay. So with your debit card, so you don't need anything special. You can join, and it will be a bit cheaper if you do and all that, but you can at least always charge. And they're now way more reliable. And I think when people see that you plug the car and you go beep and it just starts, and in 2 seconds it's on and it's charging. It's got to be
so easy.
It's got to be so easy. Anyway, we've gone off on a tangent. The thing that I've been I wanted to talk about EV sales because I don't understand what's happening here. So, because I've just literally heard yesterday that the EV sales in the UK in January in the UK, which, like, why would you even go outside in January in the UK? But they've been way up on January last year, so a really big noticeable increase. Same in many European countries, and are obviously insane in Norway. Well, they're 98% of new car sales are now battery, not even hybrids, battery electric. That's pretty close to 100, isn't it? If my maths is not good, but 98 is most of them.
Yeah, it's most of them. Yeah, I think that you can actually sort of count them. I think there's about 20 something petrol cars or diesel cars sold in Norway, and you could probably, it's just ridiculous. Look, I'm not too sure what's happening in Australia. Look, the overall new car market was down in January, but what we have seen in Australia, we've just seen this massive pushback over the last year or so, particularly by the Japanese-led manufacturers, and they've really sort of had a stranglehold over the Australian market. Toyota, Mazda, Honda, Mitsubishi, and people like that, they've really pushed back at the new sort of vehicle emission standards, which have been introduced by the federal government. There's been a big brawl over that. It's caused a split in the peak body, and so Tesla and Polestar have gone back to the Electric Vehicle Council, and the rest of the car lobby is sort of, been pushing it back against these standards. They have been introduced. They're not as strong as some were hoped. But they basically oblige car makers to sell a certain amount of electric vehicles or cut emissions over a year period. Remarkably, though, there's been this big campaign by these Japanese makers towards hybrid cars. And I just think that Australian consumers have kind of bought the hybrid hype. So we're seeing the mild hybrids, which have been popularized, made popular by Toyota and the like, and we're seeing the plug-in hybrids suddenly become very popular. So the old Mitsubishi Outlander, and we're actually seeing a lot of interest in the BYD Shark Ute, which is a plug-in hybrid. And that's actually quite interesting because that seems to be a positive step because it's away from those horrible diesel and petrol utes. I mean, I'm not a big fan of plug-in hybrids because I just think it overcomplicates things. It doesn't reduce emissions nearly as much as people think, but it could be useful in some circumstances. That's in the absence of any really compelling electric ute, then a plug-in hybrid ute made by BYD seems like a step forward. I don't think of that in terms of, sort of cars, because I just don't think you need to not be electric. But so that's the interesting thing.
I was just going to ask you about the sort of technology in the ute. I should know this because I have heard about it. But is it in a sense of, because that's the trouble. There's some really complicated terms with hybrids. There's a serial hybrid and the other. Does the petrol engine in the ute, in the BYD ute, have a mechanical connection to the wheels? Because I've got to think, because that's the big difference. Because there are some, you could argue that there are hybrids that, they're effectively range extenders. I don't know, like the London taxis are range extenders. They've got a motor in them, but it never drives the wheels. It generates power that goes to the battery in the motor.
Look, I'm going to have to say embarrassingly that I don't know the answer
to that
question because I haven't actually I haven't got to drill it on yet. But
no, I'm going to have a go in one now.
on a broad thing, I think they're sort of claimed as being at least 100 kilometres of
electric range,
of full electric range. They've got recharging vehicle to load and all that sort of thing. And they're reasonably priced, so they're probably at the same price or even cheaper than the most popular utes in Australia. And three of the four best-selling cars of any sort in Australia are utes. We're just obsessed with utes. I don't know. Maybe we've got a lot of tradespeople, but it seems like a lot of people who don't have tools in the back would like to buy a ute anyway, because why not?
Yes, I don't. Yes, I'm like, I've got a long list of reasons why not, but they clearly wouldn't have any traction here at all. But that is. I mean, it is I think. I would say that's had a bigger impact in Australia than, say, in the UK. I mean, we've had all the sort of self-charging hybrids commercials, and Toyota certainly have been a big car company in the UK. But I'd say they're on the wane now, and it's definitely Chinese cars are taking over on there as more and more of them appearing. But what's a shame from our point of view, and it's very much my fault, is I've been a little bit too publicly critical of Toyota's advertising campaigns in the UK. So our relationship with the PR Toyota's PR arm is a little strained. So we don't get So in that, which is a shame, because then you don't get to see what they are doing. So the car with the funny name, BZ, it's Beyond Zero. I've learnt this. BZ stands for Beyond Zero. BZ.
And the 4X bit? What's that bit?
I don't know what that is. That's basically they built it in cahoots with an Australian beer company. Castlemaine.
Well, it could be, or they've got four wheels. I don't know.
Or they've got four wheels. Yeah. I don't know.
Yes, no, we have the similar problems with the Toyota Media Machine. So,
But it's so
we haven't had the pleasure. So
but it's so obvious from just watching traffic in Sydney and Brisbane that Toyotas are incredibly common and incredibly must be a really big seller here. I mean, they've really got the market.
They have the market. Yeah, absolutely.
But one of the things now I've heard about and I know nothing about, and I'm hoping you do know something about, is that I've only read the headlines about the fact that the government are seriously considering some form of vehicle to grid somewhere in Australia. That's the sum total of my knowledge of it. But is there any reality in that? Is there some talk of experimenting with it on a bigger scale or whatever?
Yeah, we've had a few pilots with it, and most of them are with the old sort of CHAdeMO protocol with Nissan Leafs and a couple of Mitsubishi Outlanders and things like that. So what happened late last year was that after sort of months of sort of discussions, they agreed a new standard with the CCS2 technologies. So the standards have been agreed. And it was said by the government that these will be available and in place by the end of the year. What we then saw was a couple of sort of proactive makers of the charging equipment coming out and saying, oh, we're here, we've got it, we can plug it in, ready to go. But they haven't got final approval yet from the body set up to sort of vet these things and to make sure that they've actually met the standard. And the other hurdle is we haven't actually heard that much from the car makers themselves about whether they're going to be happy to allow this to happen, because there's issues about sort of existing cars, existing batteries, the effective warranties and things like that. A lot of people like Polestar and others have sort of said, well, we're compatible with vehicle to grid and things like that, and go, well, that's very well, but when will it actually happen? Won't really say. We've got issues with some of the network operators too, because you've got to get their agreement because it sort of feeds into the grid. And then you've also got things like with the retailers, energy retailers. So there's a few hurdles to go. But basically, one barrier has been removed. I think there's a few other barriers to happen. We're going to get the equipment in. We need the car makers to be quite explicit about what they're going to do and what equipment that they will agree to work with. And whether they'll and what sort of warranty conditions they'll put in the battery. I mean, they shouldn't really be putting many or any, but we'll wait to see. So there's been another project has been outlined in South Australia, but mostly with Mitsubishi Outlanders with a plug-in hybrid. That's still on the old CHAdeMO one, but we haven't actually seen anything with the CCS2, which is the dominant sort of protocol for modern electric vehicles. And look, and I even heard that sort of Tesla is actually considering something.
Right, because they've always been sort of opposed to it, haven't they?
I mean, they had a motivation not to agree because they want to sell Powerwalls and things like that. A lot of it's got to do with whether the people have the inverters technology within the car system, electronics, or whether it's sort of exterior, how they mix that up. And I think Tesla's still wrestling with this idea about will they allow it and in what circumstances. Maybe it needs to be coupled with one of their batteries. Maybe it needs to be coupled with something else that they've got. And I think all the car manufacturers are still working that out. So we're not going to see mass market vehicle to grid in the next couple of months. Hopefully we'll see some rolling out by the end of the year. And then hopefully in a few years' time, we'll see an awful lot of it, and we'll start to see energy retailers and other aggregators actually promoting this as some sort of technology, because the possibilities are just extraordinary, particularly when you've got in a country where, as I mentioned at the start, half of all our power needs will actually come from appliances and installations owned by households. So rooftop solar, battery storage, electric vehicles, all the other different electrification in the house, which can be sort of dialed in and sort of timed and controlled, demand response. So much of what we need for the grid will be owned by households. But how do we design a system that, one, encourages them to do that, two, makes it worthwhile for them to engage with the grid, and three, respects them as a customer and a contributor? Because at the moment, all that ticket is being clipped by the big energy companies on the way through. So the benefits of rooftop solar and things like that. If you send it back into the grid in the middle of the day, you get paid 5 cents. If you borrow it back from the retailer, you're probably going to pay 40 cents or, 6 or 10 times that much. And they justify that with all sorts of convoluted economic arguments and modelling and stuff like that. But the basic premise is that the householder feels ripped off and thinks he's not getting a fair share. And unless that feeling can be addressed by proper regulation and proper respect for these assets, then we're not going to get too far down that track.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, it is a colossal technological opportunity, which is absolutely riddled with incredibly complicated, as exactly as you said, incredibly, because that's exactly the case in the UK, incredibly complex market arrangements and structures, and it's not. I don't think it is a technological problem, or it's a very solvable technological problem, but how you market it, how you legislate for it is mind-boggling. There's so many people who might be disadvantaged by it, and some of those people are very wealthy and powerful and have leverage in political circles. I think that's probably has quite a lot to do with it.
There's a lot of vested interests of people who own networks, who own generators, who own energy retailers. And if you've ever seen the arguments and the submissions for these changes, even these oblique sort of really small changes in energy rules, and it's 150 pages long, and there's about 150 submissions, and you try and work your way through that, and you're just going, oh my God. Anyway, so death by submissions.
It'd be interested to hear what your a proper journalist, unbiased take is on a potential. So you've got potentially an election coming up in the next few months. Am I? So there's not been a date set yet, has there? I've not heard if there is.
No, it has to be held, I think, by mid-May. That's the last. So we don't actually have sort of fixed date elections as in many other countries. It's at the discretion of the government. They often go early because they see some advantage in doing so, or there's some blockage in Parliament. And we've been kind of waiting for the Labor government to make a call. There was some speculation they might go as early as February, but that clearly obviously hasn't happened. So I think the general expectation now is that they'll wait until May. And we'll see how we go. I mean, the Labor government, they're sort of ruling by, 1 or 2 seats in the lower house, which is the decisive one. They've got to deal with a powerful crossbench in the Senate. And they're looking at best at a minority government because we've got the Greens and a new independent movement or group of independent people called the Teals.
Yes. Now, I'm aware of them.
And they're really interesting people, actually. And they may well hold the balance of power. So if Labor or Liberals get to have the most seats, then they might have the opportunity to form a government. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens, because I don't think the Greens and the Teals will want to deal with a Conservative government. The Conservative parties led by Peter Dutton seem to be sort of, Trump light in the way that they're approaching everything. So they won't want to deal with them. But I'm not convinced either that the Labor Party, and particularly its leader, Anthony Albanese, is willing or wanting to deal with them, because he's like, this is a guy, he used to be my local member when I lived in his electorate, and he hates these people with a passion, and he just won't deal with them. I mean, like, he really, 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 really doesn't like them. And I was reminded, we were in Tasmania a year ago, and a similar thing happened. The Labor and the Liberals came really close in the election, but neither of them had a majority, and there's sort of a bunch of independents there that they could have talked to try and form a minority government. And the Labor leader made this wonderful speech. A lady, the woman, I can't remember her name now. She made this lovely speech, which happened to be in the radio in the car listening to on the radio. And I thought, oh, that's impressive. That sounds so reasonable, And basically sort of raising the possibility of forming a minority government in certain conditions. A day later, she was out of the job, sacked by central control, saying, no, you will not have a minority government. So,
wow.
the Liberals now rule. With a couple
in
of,
Tasmania, do they? Right.
Yes, that's right. So
I mean, I
it's
think
going to
it's
be really interesting to see what happens here.
It's worth reminding our listeners outside Australia that because so in the UK, Liberals are the sort of very centrist, centre-left-ish party, and Liberals here are not.
Well, they used to be centre-right-ish, but now they're really quite right-wing.
Right.
I mean, anyone sort of described as a moderate has faded into the background or just left Parliament, and we're seeing, another bunch. And they're in coalition with something called the National Party, which is ostensibly there to represent rural interests and farmers, but which in reality just represents the mining industry and the coal industry in particular. And they are very much anti-wind, anti-solar, anti-batteries, anti-EVs, anti-anything that was invented after about 1956. And, and starting to sort of, I don't want to get too much into politics and sort of Trump and Gaza, but, their leader said this, the would-be prime minister said, that sounds like an interesting idea.
Right.
And you're just going, okay, that's where we're going with this.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then, so like on a much lighter note, which I think is this is I think a story from RenewEconomy, but I just thought this is really interesting because this is the background. I think that you and I are always trying to highlight and promote is this company, Brookfield Asset Management, who are investing, truly mind-boggling sums in renewable energy installations and batteries. And they are managing to sell that power to corporate interests because it's cheaper. And they can also say it's green. Oh, we're very green. Our company is very green because we buy this power. But the fact is, it makes economic sense. So then you hear the arguments for drill, baby, drill. Yeah, go on, carry on, mate. No one cares. It's so expensive. If the price of oil drops by a few cents now, no one's going to frack in America because it's a waste of money. You're just throwing money down a hole. But that's really interesting that I quite like it when clearly, that you or I can have our own solar panels and we're all holier than thou and we've got our electric car and we're all virtue signaling like mad. Down the road, there's a massive multi-trillion pound investment group that are putting in solar panels because they make money, not because they are green or any other business. It's capitalism in the raw.
Yeah, and they're responding and they're saying that because it's true that the big industrial consumers want that clean energy and they want the cheap energy. And the obvious thing in Australia is wind and solar. It's the only thing that you can build quickly enough. There's a big push by the opposition parties here that they want to have nuclear and they think they can bring it in by 2035, which everybody else says is just ridiculous. It'll probably be, another decade after that. But the future of some of Australia's big industrial assets actually depend on this transition. Rio Tinto has made it clear. They've got a big smelters up in Queensland. They've got these alumina refineries, and they've got these other big energy consumers, industrial centres. And they're saying those are not going to continue beyond the rest of this decade unless we get wind and solar. And lo and behold, and they've already signed a couple of contracts with some gigawatt scale, wind and solar farms, the biggest ever signed in Australia. But now those projects are in doubt because the new state government, which is LNP, which is conservative, have said, no, we don't actually want this, and we're going to subject them to more sort of policy approval. So, there is this fear. You've got the Brookfields of the world saying, yes, we can do this and we can roll it out as quickly as we can because the demand from consumers and big industrial companies is there, but you're also getting this political interference on behalf of other vested interests who are kind of erecting barriers.
Yeah. No, it is. I mean, it is disruptive technology and it disrupts some very big industries, isn't it? And so it's kind of hardly, it's bloody obvious in some ways, isn't it? You just think, God. But I mean, because they're also, we've been in touch with them a bit. We're trying to work out what we can do with him, but I always forget his real name, Mr. Twiggy Forrest. mining.
Andrew Forrest.
Andrew Forrest,
Yes.
thank you. Who's the mining? I don't know why. Do you know why he's called Twiggy? I have no idea why, but I don't know if that is that a cruel
I should do
Australian
that.
joke.
I'm just trying to think that now. In fact, yes.
This is Nick-
he's an
maybe-
interesting character. Yeah, he's an interesting character.
But I mean, he wants to electrify his entire mining fleet, which is, you're talking basically the biggest vehicles with wheels on the planet, and he wants them to all be. Well, he's got some of them, I think, already electric, aren't they? But that's a kind of interesting mix of, in a sense, two extremes. Although, I just want to quickly say, we all very much depend on mining. You and I wouldn't be talking to each other like this if some mining hadn't happened. That's pretty obvious.
And that's very true. And he's a very big miner. He's mostly iron ore, and he wants to be an even bigger miner. Look, he is really interesting because he is like, one of the richest people in Australia, and he's just sort of calling it out. I mean, he's basically, let's observe the science. He's very dismissive about net zero targets, which other people have been using as an excuse to delay action. He's talking about real zero. He wants the whole world to get to real zero by 2040, and he wants his own mining operations to get to real zero by 2030. And as you say, that involves, they've already got these big excavators which are fully electric at their site. They've got these massive 264-ton trucks with a 10 megawatt hour charging station. Or no, is it 10? No, is it 6 megawatts charging station? Sorry.
Wow. Oh, that's what goes through the wire into the batteries is 6 megawatts.
Yes, that's right. So, look, if he can get to real zero by 2030, as he sort of says he will, he will sort of get rid of annual consumption of about 2 billion litres of diesel a year, which is currently used. So that'll save him like $4 billion.
Millions of dollars, yeah.
And that'll just sort of show the way for the rest of the industry. And you're actually starting to see those other big mining companies going, oh, okay, we can move too. And that's the sort of leadership, at least on the corporate level, that we really want to see. And look, he brought out the Williams racing team in the UK, and they're doing some really interesting things
amazing
with battery
stuff,
technology and charging technology and stuff like that. He's developing something called the Infinity Train, which is basically a train with a big battery. The iron ore mines are sitting up on the mountain, and they'll come fully laden down the hill. By the time they get to the bottom, they've recharged the battery, and the empty train can go back up the hill and start the whole thing over again.
Oh my God, that's incredible. I think that when you hear stuff like that, you go, that is bonkers. Because I mean, there's so many of those sort of weird experimental, like gravity batteries and all those things all around the world, and most of them never come to fruition. But occasionally, someone with the scientific understanding and the money can actually make some of those crazy projects function, can't they? I mean, it has happened.
It does, yes. It gives you some inspiration and some hope that we still might be living in a habitable planet.
Yes.
Planet in a couple of decades' time.
Yeah, but I mean, just to go on about, I mean, it's such an obvious one, the nuclear argument, because we're doing it in the UK. It's all going gangbusters down at Hinkley Point C, but it's now, I can't remember how many years late it is, but it's probably a decade. It's probably 10 years later than it was meant to be finished, and it's tens of billions of pounds over budget. And the sister plant, which is in Flamanville in France, which is exactly the same design, exactly the same position on a coast. They started generating power and it was all working, and then they stopped after about 2 months because there was a crack in something and they had to stop for safety reasons, and that's going to cost billions and billions of euros more to fix. And you go, for someone to say now we want nuclear power and it'll be running by 2035, please go ahead, spend the entire nation's wealth trying to make that work. It's because I have nothing against nuclear energy. We should keep all of the stuff, the nuclear power stations we got going now. We should keep them going, obviously. But it's so expensive, and the electricity as a result is so expensive that by the time it's finished, people at their houses go, "I'm not buying that stuff. I'll make my own. I'll store it in my own batteries, and I won't buy any." It's daft. It's just a daft notion.
No, look, I agree with you. Look, I used to live in Somerset, in just down the road from the existing Hinkley reactors. So I don't actually have a problem with the technology itself, but in Australia, it kind of makes no sense. One, what makes people think that they could build it as quickly as that is just daft. We're so rich in wind and solar resources. We need it now, and the proposal of the Conservatives here is to try and keep the coal-fired power generators running until they could possibly build nuclear. But these are old, they're unreliable, and they don't like the heat. And guess what? It's getting hotter. It's getting very hot. They're getting very old. And the market operators just made it very clear, saying, look, if we try and hang on to these things too long, then we're just going to have blackouts and the costs will go up. It's just not a very smart idea. But of course, now institutions like the market operator, the grid experts and CSIRO are being attacked. It's sort of it's very sad to see. But
yeah. I'd forgotten that, because I remember reading about that a couple of years ago when I was here, about how it just doesn't make any sense how coal plants don't operate very well in the heat. And you think, well, they're burning tons of coal. That's pretty warm. But they had real serious problems, haven't they, with high temperatures in the... They've
got problems with their cooling ponds, and there just seems to be valves which just sort of dissolve and melt. Even with some of the gas generators, the things that you kind of depend on switching on in those huge summer heat waves in late afternoon as the rooftop solar starts to phase off. You want to switch on these peaking generators, and in some of the worst incidents we've seen, they just haven't been able to switch on. And what's really interesting now is that it's the batteries which are coming into kind of save the day.
Well, that was a story I wanted to talk about, because the fact that batteries are now the second biggest supplier of electricity. Is that after coal? Then that would be. Is that what they've overtaken gas?
Yes, in the peak period. So in that time, in the evening peaks, the early evening peaks, when everyone comes home, starts switching things on in the house, put on their air conditioning, the rooftop solar's starting to phase out. So the evening peak, when the big demand spikes and the supply starts to sort of contract, because so much of our electricity during the day comes from solar, you need to switch on these sort of dispatchable generators. And it used to be just gas and hydro. And now what you've seen is batteries coming in number two, between 6 o'clock and 7:30 in the evening after hydro. So they've overtaken gas and they've overtaken coal in those periods. It's really, really very interesting.
Wow. So it's after hydro. So it's the two biggest ones then are hydro and batteries. Okay, yes, that's incredible. Yes. Which also means at that peak time, electricity is much cleaner than it would have been, say, 10 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yes, yeah. And that's even before. We are building so many batteries at the moment. So this time next year, you might actually see battery storage overtake hydro and become the biggest provider at those critical moments in those evening peaks, which we're starting to see in California now. So California has about 10 gigawatts of battery capacity and various durations, and we'll probably have a similar amount in Australia by the end of the year, because we're building some really big batteries for a whole bunch of different reasons, because they can do so many different things. But it's just really quite fascinating to see that transition and how that impacts.
That is extraordinary, because then it almost goes back to where we started from. Is that one of the booming parts of the Tesla company is their power packs. We've got them in the UK. I mean, they're obviously a very, I would say, they're going to be the same in a sense as the cars. The software will work, that they're modular, and you just put rows of them and they all join up together. The technology, from what I've understood from a couple of people I've spoken to, are involved in kind of that level of grid management. They go, well, they're plug and play is how he described them. You just stick them on the ground, wire them up, and they start to work.
That's exactly right. Yeah, they're actually called megapacks now.
Megapacks,
they've gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah, and they've they probably the biggest in the market at the moment. There are actually a lot of competitors coming in now, but they're considered to be great technology, and they've played such a key role in the Australian transition. I mean, you go back to 2017 after the South Australian blackouts in 2016, and basically, Elon Musk in the famous Twitter exchange with some people in Australia, and we saw the Tesla big battery, which was the first large-scale battery with Tesla machine. He said, I'll build it in 100 days. or you get your money back. And he did.
Yeah.
And changed everything.
Do you remember those were the days when we could do positive Musk stories? Wasn't it glorious?
Now we can do positive Tesla stories.
We can do positive Tesla stories. Yeah, I'm determined to keep doing positive Tesla stories. Yeah, it's very important. But one of the, we must wind it up in a minute. But one of the things you said then, which I can't believe I haven't heard before, which is Andrew Forrest, if he said that, but real zero, not net zero, is a really critically important thing, because I just sort of gave up thinking about what net zero meant. But a very dull little alarm bell made me feel like it's probably a bit of a con, along with carbon capture and storage and clean diesel, and gas is cleaner than coal, and all those arguments we've heard. That now they're so tired and sort of petty. And you go, come on, guys. But so the idea of real zero, not net zero, is quite a good argument. I just haven't heard it put in such succinct terms before.
I think we should be. That's what we should be aiming for, because I think net zero. I mean, Andrew Forrest says it's a con, and I'm inclined to agree with that. Mainly because net zero relies on carbon capture. It relies on you getting credits for planting a few trees here and there. And look, planting trees is great, but a lot of those credits which are created are really doubtful and dubious and can't be relied on. And we should not be burning fossil fuels because we don't need to. It's going to be complicated in some parts of the economy, but. And net zero, as this thing in the Australian political debate, is basically being used by some political people and they literally admit this. We don't have to do that. We have to reach net zero by 2050. We will do that, but we'll start thinking about it in a couple of decades' time. And so it's just an excuse used by some people just to kick the can down the road and not do very much. So I am actually very much in support of this real zero push.
Yeah.
I think it's very important.
I'm getting my T-shirt printed tomorrow. Real zero, not net zero. I mean, I don't. Have you got any other burning topics that you wish to bring to the table? Because those are my key things I wanted to cover, which you've done brilliantly. Thank you so much, Giles. It's been really good.
Oh, look, thanks. Look, it's been a pleasure. I think we've covered so much now, and
we have.
I'm getting old and exhausted. So
yes.
I think.
No, that's very true. And I bet you've been surfing this morning already.
No, I haven't. Do you know what?
Oh, you
I
haven't?
actually came to this. Now, here's a funny story. We're actually in Sydney at the moment because we're waiting for our car to be repaired. While we were in Tasmania, our Model Y was parked on the side of the street and a truck ran into it.
Wow. Okay. Oh, proper.
And another car.
Wow.
Unfortunately, some workers, the truck drove off, and some workers hopped in their cars and chased it down and got his license. So we've got the insurance thing. And my wife, who owns the car, was secretly hoping it was going to be a write-off so she could then move to another brand. But it's not, because the repairer told us these things are really hard to write off now, which is really counterintuitive to what you hear in the EV in the mainstream media. It's sort of saying, oh well, as soon as there's a dent, they write them off and they take them to the car grave. And he says, no, they're extremely hard to write off. So we're getting it back, and we're going to have to drive it back up the highway tomorrow. So we'll wave as we drive past in the other direction. Yes.
Oh, that's funny. Because as I was thinking about you early this morning, and I walked out of the door here. It's a very lovely, overgrown Queensland garden. It's beautiful, it's not happened to me, I don't think, ever before in any visit to Australia. But I got completely covered in, I can't even call it cobwebs. I'd call it a high tensile steel wire that stuck to my face and hands. And I was sort of going, oh my God, there'd be some massive spider. I didn't see a spider, there's still bits peeling off my skin. It's incredibly strong and sticky stuff. We have webs in the UK that are the most pathetic fluffy stuff. I mean, you just don't even notice it. But this was some serious webbage I walked into this morning. So I'm getting a bit of a refreshing Australian experience.
That's to catch all the very big flies and mosquitoes that we have.
Must be. I mean, some of them weigh 2 or 3 kilos. The flies here, they're bloody enormous. Obviously, yes. Well, that's good. Well, I hope you get to surf again soon. I'm sure you will. And I will see you in early March in Sydney.
Indeed, no, that'd be fantastic.
Looking forward to it. Yeah.
Thanks very much for having me on.
No, it's been great, Giles. Thank you so much for all your wisdom and knowledge. It's been really good. You've clarified lots of confusion for me. It's been great. Thanks very much. See you soon.
I'm still confused, but anyway, thank you.
Me
Bye-bye.
too. Really hope you enjoyed that. Don't want to harp on about it too much, but seriously, everything electric in Sydney, 7th, 8th, 9th of March, really worth going to if you're anywhere near. If you're anywhere near Australia, basically, it's worth going. And clearly, Giles will be there. That's all we've got time for this week. We're going to be talking to lots of other fascinating people in the coming weeks on the podcasts. Please do tell your mates about it. That's always a good way of doing it. And subscribe if you haven't. I'm sure you have. And as always, if you have been, thank you for listening.